Hi friends, this is Jennifer from DecorSauce, and the project I'm going to be completing for you today on camera is I'm going to refinish this bathroom cabinet with General Finishes milk paint in Seagull Gray. So I've actually used this product before. It's great. It's a nice light neutral gray color, and I think it's going to look great on this cabinet. But the first thing I have to do is I'm going to remove the doors and the hardware so that I can take this outside and clean them with two different products. First would be a TSP substitute like this one that you can buy at any big box hardware store. And then the second one is going to be a degreaser, deglosser product that just takes any shiny finish that might be left on the cabinet. It'll just take it off. And this product actually doesn't even have to be rinsed off. So first I'm going to do the TSP with a little scrub brush, and then I'll use after that dries, then I'll use the sander deglosser, which you do not have to rinse off. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the doors, and then I can take this product outside, or take these doors outside. Okay, so I brought my cabinet doors to the outdoors where I used a TSB substitute to clean them, and then I used the hose to rinse them off. And I know you're not supposed to get wood wet, but it's really hot in Florida today where I live, so I didn't worry about it too much. Just make sure they're really nice and dry after you clean them and rinse them. You have to rinse off the TSP substitute or follow the instructions on the bottle. So what I've done now is I'm actually going to prime these. Since I'm using the General Finishes milk paint instead of the gel stain, I do like a coat of primer underneath. You can do any primer you like. I am just going to prime with Bullseye, the Zinsser 123 primer, just because I have a lot of it and I might as well use it up. You could also use a brush on, but this is so fast, and I'm just going to quickly show you how I prime the fronts. Then I let them dry. It takes about 30 to 40 minutes, and then I'm going to do the other side, and then they'll be ready to take a coat of the milk paint. Now indoors, since you can't use, or I'm not going to use spray paint indoors, I'm actually going to brush it on to the cabinet base, but the doors are getting the spray primer. So this is, I'm just going to quickly do a coat of the spray primer for you so you can see how quickly it goes. As you can see by how quickly that went for the primer, I would suggest you doing the spray just because it's easiest, but it's totally up to you. I do want to mention one last thing about this primer is that it does drip a lot, and it's really this brand, Bullseye. If I wanted to spend more money on a more expensive primer, I probably wouldn't get that drip. But since I know the product really well and I know how it misbehaves, I do compensate for that by not hanging over my project when I'm doing any painting. So it is worth mentioning. I also would always recommend using a respirator just to protect your lungs. And I'm doing mine in the garage because it's Florida and it's so hot, and I'm afraid my paint will dry if I do it out in the sun. But if you live in a a cooler climate, then outdoors is best, just because then you don't get the fumes, or the fumes don't build up on you as bad. So I'm going to let these dry, do the other side, and then I'm going to take them upstairs and we'll go from there. Okay friends, so now I'm going to prime the outside of my cabinet box, since I already did the doors with the spray paint and they're drying. So for this, on the inside of the house, I'm going to be using this Zinsser cover stain oil-based primer. It's not the shellac. They do have a shellac, which is the bin. This is just Zinsser. And this, because this is only $10 a can and the other is $15. So, and on this cabinet, which doesn't really get a lot of wear and tear, this primer is going to be totally fine. And I prefer an oil-based primer over a water-based primer. It's just personal preference. It's nasty stuff. It smells really bad, but it works really good. I've never had this product fail me before. So I'm going to be priming the outside of this cabinet, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So this is what your cabinet is going to look like after you get a coat of primer on it. Now, the primer that I showed you, the cover stain, it is thin, thin, thin. It's not thick at all. So you want to make sure if you use that particular primer that you either lay down a drop cloth or you prepare to do your floor, which kind of I am for the next one. So I had some drips down here and I just used the primer and put a coat of primer on that floor down there, because this project is kind of rolling into my next project, which is to do the floor. So the floor is next. So I put a coat of primer on. It's going to take about 45 minutes to dry. I'll probably let it dry I might even let it dry overnight just to make sure that it's nice and dry for my fresh coat of the General Finishes milk paint. So I just wanted to show you what it will look like. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be solid. We just need a thin layer of primer on there so that we get a good grip for the milk paint. In fact, I don't think that General Finishes even recommends a primer underneath. I just think that for durability wise, especially because this is a kid's bath where they brush their teeth and they take baths and stuff like that, that it's important to have that coat of primer on. I just think it gives it a better grip. I've used the milk paint both with the primer and without, and there's no question that using a primer underneath just gives the paint something to stick to, especially if you don't want to sand down to bare wood. So this is all it's going to take, one little coat of primer. This probably took me about 10 minutes to do, and then as soon as it dries, we'll be ready for our milk paint. Okay, so now that my primer coat is completely dry, I'm ready to start applying my General Finishes milk-based paint in Seagull Gray. And I'm going to be applying it with both an angled paintbrush so I can cut into some of these fine lines. And then I'm also going to be using a 2-inch foam roller, just like this one, and that'll help eliminate any lines left behind from the paintbrush streaks. So here we go. Generally, using the General Finishes paints and stains, I found that one coat usually isn't sufficient, so you need to do two. So now that the first coat is done, I'm going to let it dry, and then I'll decide whether it needs a second coat after that or not. Now that I've painted the cabinet boxes upstairs, it's time to move on to the doors. And actually, I'm gonna be painting my doors inside today because I live in Florida where it's about 90% humidity, and if I paint it outdoors, my paint will have almost no chance of drying. I'm gonna start with the fronts, and I think that's important to say because I've started with the backs before when I've done projects like this, and what happens is if you accidentally drip over the edge and you don't catch it, then it's gonna dry with the drip on the front, and I would rather, if I make a mistake and it does drip, I would rather the drip be to the back where it's not going to be seen. So start with the fronts. I have my doors propped up on just cheapy plastic milk crates, and I would suggest doing that outside as well, just because it elevates your work so that you can get around all of the edges. You don't ever want it laying flat on the ground because it'll drip, it'll stick to your tarp or whatever you have laid down your drop cloth, and it's just a mess. So make sure you prop it up. If you don't have those plastic milk crates, then I would suggest using the, if you ever buy bottled water from a warehouse store, they come in those cardboard boxes that you can use as well, because that will lift your, you only need it lifted up about 2 inches. So with all that being said, let's get started. it's been 2 hours since I applied my first coat of the General Finishes milk paint, and it's just now dry enough for me to do the second coat. General Finishes recommends waiting 2 to 4 hours between coats of paint, and if you want to sand in between, then no more than 4 hours so the paint doesn't adhere as much. I'm not going to sand. I think the finish feels really smooth, and so I'm just going to skip that step because I don't think it's necessary. But it is very necessary for a second coat. It just will look a lot better. I know you can't really see it from camera, but I'm getting ready to apply the second coat. Now that the doors have dried, I'm going to treat both sides with General Finishes High Performance Top Coat. And it looks like this. Comes in the green can. This is a satin finish. The manufacturer recommends that you use some sort of top coat over the milk paint if you're going to have a high or heavily trafficked area where you're going to use that. Now this is in the bathroom, in the kids' bathroom, so it's very necessary for me to use a top coat on there just because of toothpaste and soap and everything else. And the General Finishes milk paint does have a matte finish, so it really doesn't hold up as well as you would like it to without using some sort of top coat. And I've used this product multiple times for several different projects, and I really like the durability and the way it goes on and how easy it is and all that. So the texture of this is very, very thin, and it almost looks like it's got like a milky white appearance to it. And so when we lay these coats on, we're going to do them very, very thin. And General Finishes recommends about 3 applications of this top coat before you go ahead and use your product. I also want to mention too that after you apply this, the difference between dry time and cure time. So the difference between dry time is the amount of time it takes to dry between coats. The time to cure is a lot different. That's when the paint really lays down and adheres to whatever you've painted. In this case, they say that it takes about 7 days to 21 days. So from about a week to all the way up to 3 weeks before the total cure time. And that's when you could really use your product heavily, or really use your item heavily. For me, this is going in a bathroom, and we're gonna need it before 3 weeks from now. So we're gonna give it about 7 days once the top coat goes on before we really use it heavily. Probably you could get away with it in a little less time. I just happen to be lucky that I have the house to myself right now. So we have the luxury of letting it dry for a little bit longer. So now I'm going to show you how it looks when I apply it, and then we're going to let it dry, and then I'm going to, I'll hang them up for you. So once you're done applying your General Finishes top coat in a very, very thin layer with your foam brush, you're gonna wanna just walk around and make sure that you don't have any drips around the edges, the corners, or any pooling of the product. I know from experience that once this stuff dries, it's there really for life. So, because it's got sort of a poly base to it. So just double check all your work, and then after you're finished, put your sponge brush in a baggie and put the baggie in the refrigerator, because you're gonna use this brush several more times to do several more coats. After this takes about 1.5 to 2 hours to dry, and after that. Okay friends, now that my doors are sealed and completely dry, I'm gonna do the very last phase to them before I rehang them up in the bathroom. So I have the drawer front, or the cabinet fronts sitting outside on my sawhorses, and I'm going to now add the cabinet pull hardware. These pulls are 4 inches in between holes, and I ordered them from Amazon. They were a pack of 5 for about $9. So really cheap, and they'll really dress up the doors and hopefully preserve them a little bit from wear and tear, because there's a handle now instead of just using your fingernails to open the doors. So what you guys need for this project is you need to buy, or I think this is the easiest way to do it, you'll buy an alignment kit like this, It's at every big box store, and it comes in 2 pieces, one for knobs and the other for pulls. So I'm going to be using the one for pulls today, which looks like this, and it has two tabs on the ends that lets you put this right on the door exactly where you want it. It holds it right in place so that you make the same mark on both doors, and you only have to drill a hole once and you get the perfect result every time. So the only other thing that you need for this project is you're going to need a power drill just like this one, or like this one, with a 3/16 inch drill bit, and that's the hole that this requires so that you can get your screw through to the other side of the hardware. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mark my holes. I'll show you how I do that, and then I'm going to drill the holes for the hardware. So now I'm back in front of the bathroom, and the last thing I have to do is rehang the doors onto the cabinet box. And this is where you're going to match up your hardware with your proper door. And the reason why is because these little screws on your bracket have already been adjusted to fit the door so they hang properly. These are little adjustments that you can make to the doors to make sure they line up at the top and the bottom, in order for me not to have to readjust the way the doors hang and make sure they are still hanging nice and straight after I put them back on, is to just keep the proper hardware with the proper door. And so that's where this comes in handy, where I wrote the TL for top left and then the TL in the door hole itself, just to remind me so I know what hardware goes with what door. So before I hang the doors back up, I'm going to insert this piece. It's just easier if you put this on first, and before you try to, you wouldn't want to hang it. You wouldn't want to hang this part first and then have to hang the door on top of it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to match up all the little bits with their door. And I'm going to use my little handheld screwdriver and the 2 little screws that came with it to reattach the hardware to the door so that I can hang them. So now that I've hung my doors, all I have left to do is install my new cabinet hardware that I just drilled fresh holes for. And now that it's all finished, I'll show you the after shot. So now that I've finished the cabinet and the floors in this very small bathroom, I've pretty much done everything except for the sink top and the faucet itself. So maybe someday I'll get to that project and I'll show you that when I do that as well. Thank you very much for watching my channel, Jennifer DIY. For more great home tips, please visit my blog website at DecorSauce.com. And if you found this video informational, useful, helpful, you liked it, whatever, I would really appreciate if you like or subscribe so I can keep bringing great videos to you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great DIY.